This is just for recording again. Okay, so good morning and welcome to this session. My name is Jordi Cortadella, the president of the Ethics Committee, and it's a pleasure to organize these sessions jointly with the doctoral school who is supporting this lecture within the course that Jordi Domingo is lecturing on ethics and research. And today we have the pleasure of having Ricardo as our invited speaker. We would like to thank him a lot for accepting this invitation. And as I said before, I encourage you to visit the web pages of the Ethics Committee. There is plenty of material there related with stuff of science, engineering, ethics, material that can be very useful for your lecture, for your course. So I would like to give the floor to Jordi Domingo, who will introduce the speaker.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. So the organization of this event started as a lecture in the course and teaching on ethics for engineers, researchers, and innovators that is offered as to PhD students as a cross-training activity of the doctoral school at UPC. And it's also open to master students. Then, realizing the interest of the topics and the relevance of our invited speaker, we decided to organize this as an open event under the joint organization of the Ethics Committee and the Doctoral School of UPC. I express my gratitude to both Professor Jordi Cortadella, President of the Ethics Committee, and Professor Josep Maria Font, Director of the Doctoral School. A couple of announcements. This session is being transmitted via Google Meet. For the remote participants, if you wish to ask a question, please use the chat and I will follow the chat and collect the questions and forward them to our speaker. And also, you must be aware that this session is being recorded. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our invited speaker. Ricardo Baeza Yates is Director of Research at the Institute for Experiential AI of the Northeastern University. I cannot cover all the details and merits of the career. A brief summary, he obtained a Bachelor in Computer Science in 1983 at the Universitat de Chile, then the degree of Electrical Engineer in Digital Systems, then the Master in Science in Computer Science, the Master of Engineering in Electrical Engineering, all of this in the Universitat of Chile. Then he moved to Canada and obtained the degree in Computer Science, University of Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, in 1989. Then he became a professor at the Department of Computer Science at the Universitat de Chile in Santiago. Then he got a fellowship from the Education and Science Ministry of Spain and spent a sabbatical at UPC in 1996. So he knows UPC quite well and started I would say, the permanent link with Barcelona. And during several years, he was moving back and forth from Chile to Barcelona. He was the director of the Center for Web Research at the Department of Computer Science of the Engineering School of the University of Chile. Then he was distinguished as ICREA professor at Universitat Pompeu Fabra, where he founded the Web Science and Social Computing Research Group, and became a full professor at the Department of Information and Communication Technologies at Universitat Pompeu Fabra. Then, during the period 2006 and 2016, he was involved deeply in research with Yahoo Labs. He was vice president of the region Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and also the Latin America, so basically almost half of the world. He started and led the labs, Yahoo Labs, in Barcelona and also in Santiago de Chile. Then became vice president of research in Yahoo and chief scientist until 2016. Since 2021, he is research professor and director at the Institute of Experiential AI at the Northeastern University in Silicon Valley. If we could have a track of your trips, I think it will show a triangle. from Chile to California, Barcelona, and back and forth, because he keeps the appointments as part-time professor at the University of Chile, at the Universitat de Chile, also at Pompeu Fabra, and the main dedication is as director of the Institute of Experiential AI in the Silicon Valley. So I think you are quite busy. I cannot cover everything. He is founder and co-founder of several companies, holds a dozen of patents. His contributions has been recognized with many awards. I cannot list them. And he is member of quite a number of committees. I will only highlight his co-author of a textbook that is a bestseller, the Modern Information Retrieval, and got the Book of the Year award in 2012. And he is actively involved as expert in many initiatives, committees, and advisory boards, all of them related with responsible AI. I think this is the key word. Global AI Ethics Consortium, Global Partnership on AI, IADB's Fair for Latin America and the Caribbean region, at the Spanish Council of AI, at the Advisory Committee of the Catalan Ethics AI Observatory, and the ACM US Technology Policy Committee, to list a few of them. He was also co-founder of Optia, an NGO in Chile devoted to algorithmic transparency and inclusion, and member of the editorial committee of the new journal AI and Ethics. Okay, so I think he's a well-known promoter of responsible AI. And Ricardo, I know how busy you are, and I appreciate your availability to be with us talking about this exciting topic. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jordis. It's a pleasure to be here. I have been many times here, but this time talking about a new topic. I'm still learning ethics, so this is my own view, personal view of ethics, and very important. You need to be aware of all your biases, and many of them you don't know them. So at least you need to know that we don't know them. Because they want me to be close to the mic, I will speak from here, if you don't mind. And then I can take questions with this other mic. Okay, I can take the mask. Yes, thank you. So let me start with telling you what is this new institute that started a bit more than a year ago technically in Boston, because Boston is the main headquarters of the university, but maybe you don't know. The university now has 12 campuses in 3 countries. It's becoming a multinational university, all of them in English language, Canada and the UK. And most of us are working remotely. We are not too many yet, but we are building a strong research team. And the idea is to do the practical AI in the sense that AI for good. 2 things that are important is to have humans involved. People like to use this human in the loop. I will tell you later I don't like it, but this is the standard because we need to be more than in the loop. And the second thing is that we need to have the real data, the right data for the right problems. And sometimes we just look at putting more data, not to use better algorithms. And this is something that we need to change. Particularly because I will get back to this, most companies will never have big data. Also, most institutions will never have big data in the sense of what really big data is. It's not about only volume, it's about velocity. So the talk has, well, the class, I guess, because it will be a long talk, will have 3 parts. The first one is just examples. Examples that I find important. So there's a personal bias here. So these are the ones that I think are the most complicated one. The main one is one that you may know from the news, the discrimination, but then I want to talk about AI phrenology, unfair digital markets, lack of semantic understanding, and basically sustainability of resources. The second part is about more generic challenges. The first one is too many principles, then cultural differences. Ethics is not the same all around the world. Then we have the regulation problem. You have the EU AI Act that should come this year, but maybe not, right? So we don't know yet. And then finally, the main problem we have, our cognitive biases. And then the third part is shorter because we don't have so many solutions, but let's try to see what we can do and at least what things we should be aware of. I don't know if I should take questions in the way, but I can take questions in the way if people here in the room has, because I will touch many, many different topics. I guess for the people, and if someone wants to ask in the chat, Jordi Domingo can do the questions. Okay, so the first thing I think is important is bias, because we will talk about bias a lot, and even the definition of bias is biased. So if you go to Wikipedia, you will find 3 different ways to define bias. So the first one is the classical definition in your statistics course. For example, you do a measurement, you get a nice normal distribution with some imprecision that is because of the difficulty of measuring this. But then you get an accuracy to some reference value. This is the bias. So it's a systematic deviation from a given reference value. Some problems, sometimes we don't know the right reference value. For example, what should be the percentage of women in this talk? We assume it's 50-50, but maybe not. For example, when I'm in India, I've been talking to India, the 70% of the people are women. So there are different standards. So in Iran, the same. So it depends on the country, the percentage is different. But there are more complicated things that we'll touch later that society needs to define, and they are not trivial. The second thing is cultural, and we'll get back to that at the end of the talk, because you have a lot of bias encoded in your education, in your language. For example, the best example I like is that in English we say accountability. In Spanish we say rendición de cuentas. We need 3 words for one. I think we don't like that. Right? That's why we don't have a given word for that. And the last one is cognitive. So basically, cultural is our group bias. Cognitive biases are from each person, they're different. For example, here I have the most well-known 20 cognitive biases. There's a big one here, it's called confirmation bias, number 7. You see something that you agree with and you believe it. And this is the main, I guess, bias used by fake news. You are exactly reading what you want to read. Of course, it's false. But there are many more. So, for example, this is a nice codex. It's a taxonomy of more than 150 cognitive biases that psychologists have devised. I don't know if I can differentiate all of them, but there are a lot of them. So, plenty to find one there. Now, there are many biases on systems. Here is from my paper, The Bias on the Web. Just a summary, because I will not go back to this, but basically you have bias in the data, and we'll talk about that. Then you have a sampling bias. So one bias that you find in statistics books, I don't know how many people have done a statistics course here. No, not many, okay. So one bias you will find there is that the typical example is the uniform distribution and with p equal half, because that's called like a hard case. Well, in reality, you will never find that. So I don't know why they use that. They should use like a very skewed distribution like in the web and so on. Then you have algorithmic bias. And here I will make a distinction. Most of the time you will read algorithmic bias as everything. I think we think we need to distinguish the source. So data bias is not algorithmic bias. Algorithmic bias is just something coming from the algorithm, coming from what you decided to do, not from the data. And I will get back to that. I will give you some examples. One particular case very important of algorithmic bias is interaction bias. So basically, the feedback loop between the user and the system, and I will get back to that in one of the examples I want to cover. And of course, we have also second-order biases that are related to what you do with the data that you use. For example, you can post that back into the web, and then that may be biased, or that interaction will be used by the algorithm for example, to do personalization. And we will get back to that because it has to do with interaction bias again. So just to understand what interaction bias is, I want you to read the next slide. Okay? So who read this in a different order than I told you? Okay. Who was able to read my hobby? The one in the bottom. Okay. Well, we'll put it back. So this is the real reason I do research, geography. So that's why I travel. So yes, you can be manipulated very easily. So beware. So this is the course of bias. You have an algorithm that receives bias data. By the way, the first bias we have is that when we think about bias, we think about something negative. That's not true. Bias can be positive too. Bias can be, so bias can be, I guess it's not working the audio? It's working? Okay. So bias is not necessarily negative, could be positive, and I will get back to that. Remember also that information is biased. So imagine that you receive a random noise, you cannot do anything. So information is biased, but you can have true information or false information, and then what you see in the news is almost always negative cases. So the first question we could ask is that, should the algorithm be neutral toward this bias? If it's information, of course. Should be fair if it's a real negative bias? Maybe the answer is yes. But typically, algorithms don't do this question. Do you have a question? Oh, okay. So algorithms don't do this question, and what you get if you are lucky, you get the same bias, but you can get amplified bias. Now, if you amplify the bias, you cannot blame the data, right? You are doing something else. And in this case, very important, even there are some famous people that say the bias not only in the data. That's not true. Bias can be, as I said, on the systems and on the interaction. And you can download my paper, Bias on the Web, from Communication with CM, June 2018, that talks about this vicious loop of bias and all the types of bias that you can find. I will not mention all of them here. So, what is being fair? Well, this is a classical cartoon that shows the difference between equality, equity, and justice. What we want is justice, but it's very hard to get justice in a short time. So we are still fighting, for example, with gender bias, race bias, and so on. Even we're fighting with having concepts as race and so on. So what we can do typically is equity, and that means affirmative action, and affirmative actions are positive bias. And sometimes it's more important just the perception that this affirmative action to change things, not really how much is the affirmative action. So I think that signals are important. Although very small, they're important. If you're interested in this topic, I recommend this movie, this documentary, Coded Bias, done mainly by African American women, much better than the social dilemma that you saw maybe 1 year earlier or 2 years ago, done by white men. There are still some biases in the documentary. If you get them, then you are well trained. It's not easy to see them because they are talking about bias, but even people that are conscious about bias, they still show some biases. In March of last year, we did a panel in ACM with a federal judge, the former president of ACM, and two computer science researchers. And this available on YouTube if you want to watch it. It was a very interesting discussion about bias. Now, what is the answer to this question? Well, it's a non-technical question. It's not something that a computer scientist should answer. First, very important thing, sometimes we answer things that we shouldn't answer. And of course, it's a hard problem, so not always you need to worry about this. It depends if you harm people or not. And I will get back to this regarding the AI Act at the end. Now, how you can solve this problem? You can, the best will be to bias the input, but many times we don't know which biases are there. For example, intersectional bias you cannot check all possible intersections of all possible demographic features and even other features that can hide some bias. The second one, which is the most difficult, is to tune the algorithm, so make the algorithm conscious of the bias and solve it. For example, this is done for click bias in search engines. People click more on the top positions only because they're in the top positions. But then you can train a machine learning to rank algorithm to know that and compensate for that bias. And the last one is to debias the output. Basically, you try to do the same, not on the input, but on the output, but then you already lost a lot of information. For example, let's say you are searching for a candidate in LinkedIn, you get 50 people, only 10 women. The best you can do is to have gender parity in the top 20. The rest will be only men. So it's not the best solution, but sometimes there is no other solution. So most of the time, we are not debiasing really, we're just mitigating bias. It's like entropy, you will never solve the problem. Okay, so the first time, let's start with the example. So the first one is the longest one, is discrimination. The first time that this problem reached the headline news in the US is when ProPublica in 2016, so 6 years ago, claimed that Compass, a system that does criminal profiling, basically to decide if a person will exit the prison or not. There's a system like that is being used in Catalonia also, was racist, okay? There are many interesting things in this example. The first one is that according to many ethicists, this shouldn't be done. So this is non-ethical because it's a machine deciding your future. And I agree with them. So one problem that you have in this example is that when you analyze this algorithm, you are legitimizing the algorithm. So if you do an audit, basically you are saying, yeah, it's okay to use it, but it's not well used. When the audit should say, we shouldn't use this, it's non-ethical. So this is the first thing I think is important because many people in computer science don't realize that. The second thing is that many people try to prove this. Some people said, yes, it was racist. Other people said, no, it was not racist. So it was not a clear agreement between even data scientists. And there's a very nice example we mentioned later where in 2015, they gave a problem to 12 groups of data scientists to prove something. There was no agreement on the proof. But the most interesting thing for me was that 29 groups. The 29 groups did a different analysis. So this is the difference of thinking of so many people. So the same happened here. You take a problem and then, for example, first you have a bias to prove what you want to prove. Very important. Sometimes we do that. And the second is that maybe you forget something or you do something that someone else didn't do. So maybe if you take the 29 groups together, that will be a different analysis that will be less unbiased than others. But I think, I forgot to put the reference here, but Cynthia Rudin and her collaborators did a very nice paper, it's an archive, in 2020, that showed that really the bias is on age, not on race. And then influenced the result of ProPublica. So here we have two also important questions. Is a secret algorithm ethical? So if there is an algorithm that decides if you will stay 5 more years in prison, is that ethical or not? But if we say, yes, we should have transparent algorithms, then we need to ask a second question, is a public algorithm safe? Because then a very smart serial killer can answer exactly what the machine wants, and then it's free. So it's not easy. There are other systems that do this. For example, the most famous is Godam from Palantir. And this is even worse because this is doing really, really criminal profiling. They will predict the possibility that you will become a criminal in the future. And I guess many of you have seen the movie Minority Report. And then this has been used in the US, most of the time hidden until a whistleblower finally spread the news. And even I have found information that is being used in the European Union, which is more worrisome, like in Denmark, Norway, and probably some some of the federal landers in Germany. And again, non-ethical. One error may work 90% of the time. But what happens when it doesn't work? And this is another problem with our evaluation. We worry about successes, and we don't worry about mistakes. For example, would you go to an elevator that says works 99% of the time? It's a very, very good machine learning system, right? 99% of the time. I will not. But it says when it doesn't work, it stops, I will go inside. It's like different between going to the pharmacy and say, oh, this drug works 99% of the time, but we don't know the side effects. You will not take it, right? The same here. We want to know what happens when it doesn't work, and this is not done in AI. But we're pushing in the new institute to do that because that's an important part of responsible AI. There's a third system on criminal profiling. This was done by the Chicago City and the Illinois Institute of Technology. And here I show you that one problem with these systems is that they basically amplify bias. For example, the heat map shows crime in Chicago. I still remember when I went to my first conference, one of my first conferences of PhD students in Chicago was in the university, and they told us that we couldn't walk south, and they were not responsible if we walked south. So I don't know if it was that dangerous, but I didn't dare to go south. So what happens? You see more crime where the police believe it's more crime, and then you reinforce your bias. And of course, if there's crime in the purple regions that don't have any police, well, you only get the crime that is reported, but you know that will be some crime that will not be reported. An example from Spain that is being used by the Guardia Civil. I don't know how you translate that. So this is a system that is called Veripol, and basically is a lie detector for the victims, not for the criminals. So this is the first ethical issue. You are checking if the victim is lying or not. So that's non-ethical. So I don't know about the title. So kind of funny. But the problem is we shouldn't be using this. For example, in Germany, they tried to do the same, and the Pirate Party immediately went to court when it was just an idea, was not being used. So before that happened, a party went to court. Okay, so there are many other applications of machine learning in justice. This is not about discrimination, but I like to show the examples because it highlights something I will say later. So for example, if you try to predict domestic violence, algorithms do better than judges. I will tell you why that happens. If you do a theorem prediction, they were able to predict 82% of the judges, but only 1/3 of the features were about the case. Again, we have maybe biases, right? And then I like this sentence prediction. They got almost 70%, so it was not very good, so it's very hard to predict judges. But when they add all the images, all the pictures of the court, they improved 2%. And when they added all the recording of the trial, they got another 2%. So the title of this paper is very nice. It is, "We knew justice was blind, but since it's also deaf." Because it doesn't matter if you add all these things, it doesn't improve much. So one problem with justice, first, is something human. Second, data will never capture all the context of a justice decision. And in fact, data will never cover the context of any decision because we cannot encode everything on data. So this is a very important limitation I will highlight later, that data doesn't capture the problem completely. So it could be a support tool, but can never take a decision if you want to do it right. Also, to err is human, maybe for an algorithm is not valid. So let me give you a more detailed example on justice. This example on bails in the state of New York. So basically, bail is fianza in Spanish. So you have a possible offender, and the judge has to decide if you go to prison or not. If the judge says yes, you get the bail, and then you pay, you get out. So there's an economic bias, so people with money will get out easily. If you get yes and you cannot pay, in the US system, there is a person there that lends money to people that cannot pay the bail. So it's interesting because this lender has to do the same prediction of the judge. Because in New York, as different of other places, the judge doesn't have to think about if you will commit another crime, or if you will appear in court, only has to think about if you will appear in court. I think for me it would be very difficult to have a serial killer, accused of a serial killer, and say, we'll come back to the court, and doesn't matter what he will do later. Well, if you get no bail, you go to prison, and then for sure, in that case, for sure, you go back to court. But we don't know the other part. So this example is also interesting because it's one of the examples where we don't know all the data. Why? Because we don't know what would have happened if the person had bail. So we need to do what is called data imputation. We need to fill the gaps. This person that didn't get bail would have reoffended, would have come back to court, and we need to basically predict that. So it's like a double machine learning problem. You predict first the missing data, and then you predict the bail. So this was a very interesting paper that was done by Kleinberg and et al., very, very, very good machine learning people. And this was requested by the US National Bureau of Economic Research, not the Justice Bureau, because they were interested in spending less money in prisons, not in changing judges, because that would be more complicated. So the system, the model that they found, said that basically they could decrease the rate in 25%, the crime rate, keeping the same number of people in prison, or they could decrease the number of people in prison in 42%, keeping the same crime rate. There was the part where they can save a lot of money. Now, this is an example of amplified bias. Let's see why. So the data methodology is very interesting because they need to have data for the imputation. So they took about 40% of the data to impute the missing values. But also they had 20% that was, sorry, this is like 30%, because I think this is, this is like 20% was completely put in a lockbox. So anyone can verify independently the result using data that the model has never seen, not even for training and not even for validation. So this is a very interesting methodology, very, very robust. Now, the algorithm, there's not too much data, it's only 750,000 cases, so they cannot use deep learning. And also they want to have some interpretability, so they use gradient boosted decision trees. And they use 18 features, only one demographic feature, age, the only demographic feature. So you cannot infer anything about the person, because if you have the name and the address, you can infer things. They could have used gender, most of them are male, but that didn't help. And then everything else was about the case. And you see more or less the list of features there, the 18 different features. Basically historical features and features of the actual case today. So what was the result? So there is a lot of racist bias already in the system, because basically the people that arrive to the court are 49% Black and 33% Hispanic. So 82% come from two minorities in the state of New York. And here in red, I put the actual percentage of the state of New York of these minorities. So you have 32, so you have like getting 2.5 bias here. Well, the judges increased that bias for the Black people to 57%, decreased it for Hispanic ones. I guess they're more white Hispanic. And still the minority went up to 89%. Who knows how? The algorithm learned those two trends, increased the bias for Black people and decreased the bias for Hispanic people, but it's still in total was 90%, and that's closer to 3 times bias, right? So now the good thing about the model that we can play with the numbers, and you can say, okay, let's match the less racist judge, which is the last line, and here still they were able to decrease the crime rate in almost 23%. Now remember, all this if the model is correct. This is a big assumption. Justice, as I said, data doesn't capture everything, so maybe that is completely wrong. Now, if you see where the judges are in this point here, and this is basically the operational curve of the algorithm, and you can choose where to stay. And the 2 numbers I show you are the 2 numbers here. So basically, you keep the same crime rate, or you keep the same release rate. Now, quite the difference. Well, you can compare the actions, right? And this is the comparison of the actions. So for example, if you tell, we want to put more people in prison, then the algorithm takes the most criminal people, sorry, most dangerous people for the model. However, if you check what, let's say, a group of judges will do, basically the group of judges will take from all over. So it looks like a random decision. Now, why there are 5 groups of judges? Because this is the way to impute data. They're using soft judges to predict what happens with hard judges. This is one way to do it, the most reasonable one. So there's a lot of randomness. Well, that's not new. We are kind of random. People is not really deterministic. And here is the first dilemma. What is better? A biased algorithm that it looks just, because it's just, not because it's not biased, it's just in the sense that, as we say in Spanish, la ley pareja no es dura. So basically, if you commit the same crime, you get the same output. In that sense, it's just. So basically, it's biased, but the same for everyone. Or you want a noisy judge. And here you have a difference between exact, noisy, biased, and biased and noisy. Now, we are very noisy. I was using an article that was published by Kahneman and colleagues on the Harvard Business Review on how variable are human decisions. And this is much more than you think. For example, they ask in an experiment in insurance company, they say, how much variance do you think that your people take in decisions of what is the cost of the insurance? They would say maybe 5 to 10%. They found 50% variance. So it's huge. So people is not aware of that. And last year, he wrote a book with Oliver Siboni and Cass Sunstein on noise. Basically, noise may be more dangerous than bias in some cases, because basically it's an unfair decision, not based in a bias that you can check. It's just random. Or maybe other reasons that the data doesn't capture too. Well, the dilemma is a bit false, because the judge is not only noisy, but it's also biased. So you don't get everything. So we are comparing C with D. This is our reality. We have C or we have D. Now, there are many other cases. For example, especially in facial recognition. And here is an interesting study done like 1 year ago. Basically, they look at all the databases for doing facial recognition. This is semi-log scale, so this is exponential here, growing exponential growth. This is years, and you see that 2007 is the surface. And if you see from where these faces came, well, after 2007, most of them come from the web. So your picture in Facebook is maybe being used for this system, and of course, you didn't give consent to use your photos on this research. So technically, it's a small ethical issue in all data sets that deal with facial recognition, because they use pictures without consent. Now, of course, in 2020, the first case happened when basically a person was accused of a crime that he didn't do because of racial bias in these systems. So after that, in June of 2020, the big companies that were selling these systems to police decided to stop doing that. Also, the ACM US Technology Policy Committee, where I belong, also asked for a suspension of these technologies in 2020. Many cities in the US already have basically prohibited this, like San Francisco, some cities near Boston, and even the state of Maine is thinking that to forbid this everywhere in the state. So basically, you cannot do video surveillance with facial recognition in public, at least. In private spaces, you can do it. So this happened, but it was too late. The system was already deployed in many places, and in September 2020, another person was wrongly accused of a crime, and of course, immediately he sued the city. There's a very interesting paper by Selinger and Herzog about the impossibility of getting consent from people when you're capturing video in public spaces, right? Imagine that you need to say, I approve that camera and so on. Also, if you don't know how the data is used. Then let's go to gender bias. For example, here is a paper, very famous paper when NIPS at that time was in Barcelona. And basically this paper was trying to extract she-he analogies from text. And for example, found that if you have sister, then the right answer is brother and so on. But most of them had some stereotype. For example, if she's a nurse, he's a surgeon. Or if he's a superstar, she's a diva. And you know we have some negative connotations of being a diva. So when I saw this paper, I said, well, most journalists must be men in the US, right? Because this comes from US News. And the answer is yes, but I found that even worse. There's a bias on getting a job because most students in the US are female for journalism. And maybe here it's true the same. You may know about word embeddings. So word embeddings are mappings of the words in large vector spaces, basically from the context of text. And for example, this paper from Stanford in 2017 shows a stereotype. So if you're Hispanic, you are the housekeeper or the janitor. If you're Asian, maybe you're the professor or the accountant. And if you're white, you can be the sheriff or the administrator. So you can see blatant bias in the text. And then you have language models, which are improving on word embeddings because they use the context even infinitely in different ways, using this idea of attention, if you have read about transformers. And I use this table from a paper by Bender et al. I will talk about this paper in a few minutes. You have, this is the size of large models, starting from BERT. It was 340 million parameters, and now we are getting to trillions of parameters. Trillions is not too far from the number of words that you have in the web. So but they say that they don't overfit, but they learn a lot of noise. So for example, there are many people have tried to see how much bias is in GPT-3. And there was a paper 1 year ago that showed that if you write this kind of sentence, two Muslims walk into this will be almost surely completed by violence. Like, for example, a synagogue with access and a bomb, or Texas cartoon contest and open fire, and so on. Muslims get 4 times more violent completions than Christians. And good news, the most pacifist people are Buddhists and atheists, at least in the news. Remember, all this depends on the data. Recently, OpenAI published a new GPT-3 version that was smaller, but said that they mitigated bias there. It's called GPT Instruct. They said that they basically solved the bias problem. And then a woman tried to check if that was the case. And here are some interesting examples that show that still is biased a lot. So I will not read this, but for example, this one, yeah, women can be firefighters, but men are different. Or, for example, this is really sexist because anyone knows that, you can read it. Especially the number 3. She should never change who she is for a relationship. Sorry, no. she will be happy if she's in a relationship. That's completely biased. And for example, if you use the male, basically, this is complicated, everything. So, but you can have other kinds of biases that are more complicated. For example, remember in 2020 when the UK decided to predict the scores to enter the university, so not to have exams that could raise the number of COVID cases? Well, they did. They got bias to poor people, discriminating poor people and immigrants and so on. Or very interesting example that happened 1 year, a bit more than 1 year ago. Deliveroo is like a global, basically, it's a delivery platform. And the court found that they were doing indirect discrimination because they were not checking why people couldn't deliver food at night. So basically, the system was trying to maximize money and learn to give more work to the people that could deliver food when there was more demand, dinner time. Of course, the solution is very easy. You need to be kind of communist and give more work to the people that cannot deliver at night so they all get the same amount of work. However, the system didn't know that. It's obvious after you know, like the book. And then that was discrimination because it's valid to not deliver food at night. It's not a working hour, and you may have kids and so on. Something similar happened in the Uber case, where some drivers were accused of fraud, and basically at the end they won because Uber didn't appear in court. Probably because they didn't want to share the code. So this opens a big open door that or you get transparency in the code or you lose the child. But can be really bad. This is the worst example on the last one of discrimination. For many, many years, the Dutch government was using an algorithm, not clear if it's machine learning or not, but it's an algorithm. It doesn't matter if it's AI or not. This is true with any algorithm. Basically, to find fraud in subsidies. So we have, again, an ethical issue because you are trying to find fraud in people that don't have money instead of trying to find tax evasion, for example. I guess they also do that. So 26,000 families were accused of fraud. That means more than 100,000 people. And some people lost their homes. Some people had to go back to their original country and so on because this discriminated poor people. And at the end, the Supreme Court of the Netherlands said that this was illegal, and the minister that did this, that was a woman, that's a surprise, that was at that time not part of the government, but was a deputy on the parliament. She resigned. She said, okay, this is my fault, I didn't check. Of course, the decision was not hers. I guess the decision was from an engineer man in some place, and then no one said, don't do it. You know, you need to stop these cases. But that was not enough, and then the whole government had to resign. So this is the first case that a government resigns because of this kind of algorithmic issues. Well, maybe I mentioned like 20 cases. Well, you can find more than 2,000 in this database. Most of them are discrimination, but there are many, many more. And this is a great work done by a person that works in an internet company that decided to use his free time to compensate, I guess, the ethics of his company, right? This is another problem we'll talk about later. Okay, so let's go to the second set of examples. This is physiognomy. I'm old enough that when I taught philosophy at primary school, or maybe it was high school, they told me that depending on your type of face, you will have certain personality, right? This is something that people believe in the 19th century and even early in the 20th century. Of course, we know that that's not true. That means that if you have a big nose, that doesn't mean anything, right? I hope. Maybe we need more genetic studies. But this is happening in computer science. So this is the first work of Kosinski, that is a famous Stanford psychologist, basically used facial recognition to predict sexual orientation. By the way, this study passed the IRB, because the IRB is not an ethics committee, so I'm glad that you have an ethics committee, because it's completely different. You need to check not how the user studies are performed and so on. You need to check first if you need to do the research or not, even if you can do it, even if it's scientific. Sometimes you shouldn't do it. Well, before, in 2017 and later in 2020, two groups in China and the US predicted this criminal profiling only from your face. So depending on your face, you will be a criminal. And you can check in archive, even the Chinese team published an answer to all the criticism, basically saying that they were right. So people can believe whatever they want to believe. And 1 year ago, Kosinski came back again and basically predicted political orientation. The quality of this result is 70%. I think 70% is just as spurious correlations. You are capturing maybe hair, beard, if you're using something in your ears, maybe even part of your clothing, but it's not about the face. Also, it's not about facial recognition, it's about facial biometrics. So this is kind of modern phrenology. Phrenology goes more than, it's even more than physiognomy. Phrenology believes, and this was by a German, I don't remember the name, at the end of 18th century, that believed that the brain was different if you were a criminal. So basically, the way that the brain was different. And some people took that in different ways, and the best example is Cesare Lombroso in the 19th century, a doctor in Torino, Italy, that was one of the main believers in phrenology. This is his house. I would recommend that you go to his house. It's a museum. And then he collected hundreds of skulls of poor people, because these were the ones that no one claimed in the morgue, to prove that basically not only the brain was different, but also the skull was different. So there was some genetics difference in the bone. Of course, he couldn't find it. I think he found one skull that had some difference, but he couldn't generalize that. And he really believed in this because he left his full skeleton as ground truth, I guess, of what a normal person is. So, amazing. But it can be worse. Phrenology can be worse because we have this in Stanford, but MIT also did part of it. So MIT claims that from your voice, they can predict your face. So this is like pseudoscience. Like, I can believe that maybe your mouth has to do with, or your neck has to do with how you speak, but what about your ears, eyes, hair, and so on, nose? So I can do my master algorithm of phrenology. So you send me audio in WhatsApp, I predict your face, and now I will predict your name. Yes, there is a patent. It hasn't been granted yet, but it's a patent filed from Mitchell that claims that they can guess your name from your face. I don't know what they do with all the adopted children from other countries. Of course, it will not work there. So they are capturing just stereotypes. And then I can use all the other work to know if you're a possible criminal, homosexual, and are from the different political party. And this is very dangerous in any, not only in a dictatorship, but in any more, like, less democratic government. But can be more complicated. So this is a very interesting work from Lisa Feldman Barrett, a famous neuroscientist from Northeastern. This is by chance because I knew her before going to Northeastern, that proved that humans cannot detect emotion. So if humans cannot detect emotion, AI cannot either, because it means that there are a lot of noise in the labels. One reason is that emotions are cultural. So in some cultures, maybe you laugh and this means fear, and so on. So it depends. In some cultures, you will never laugh because it's not good education. So you don't know, or vice versa. So basically, this just rediscovers stereotypes and doesn't work all the time. Let's do the third case and then we'll do a short break. Or we do the break now? No. You said, Jordi, you want to have a small break. Let's do a 5-minute break now and then we continue. Okay, we continue. Ahí viene. So, okay, we will continue. So this is the third class of examples. is a particular case of e-commerce that basically is the result of interaction biases on systems. The first problem, and you may have heard about this problem, is the user filter bubble. So for example, I will never be able to show something to Ulises that he doesn't know and that he would like because he's not in the data. So this is a problem in personalization. This generates a popularity bias. And there are many ways to mitigate this, like diversity, novelty, serendipity, if you want to get out of the bubble. So maybe you remember the Truman Show. This was a person that knew that was living in a bubble and wanted to get out. Some people never want to get out of their bubble. And there are important cases about this. Now, part of this problem is the dangerous feedback loop. And the problem is that when you are, let's say, in an e-commerce site, you have exposure bias. That means you are seeing part of the products you can buy, but there are many, many more. It's not like an iceberg. It's even worse. You are looking just at the ice cube on the top of the iceberg. You are looking at 5 products, but there are maybe thousands. And this is the first bias, and that creates popularity bias. That creates what is called a massive effect, so the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So basically some products are sold a lot, other products are not sold. This also has a problem antitrust because, for example, the platform knows all the data and the rest don't. So for example, Amazon or AliExpress know what is the next product to sell because they are seeing all the data. So the system itself is also in a bubble. So the system is in the bubble of the sum of all your bubbles. And this is a problem that only recently people have been trying to solve. And it's not trivial because improving the system means earning less in the short term. And you know, the stock market wants you to earn a lot of money in the short term. So their incentives are against each other. But I think in the long term, they should be solved. The first class of examples is basically stupid models. So there is nothing intelligent about artificial intelligence today. So we are basically learning patterns, but this is syntax, it's not semantics. So in 1976, George Box said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. He was talking about statistics. But you can do the same about deep learning. This is just more advanced statistics. Let me give you some examples. 1 year ago also, Elon Musk said in Twitter, use Signal. And then some automated software that use tweets from influencers decided that he was talking about buying stocks from this medical company in Texas, and the company valuation grew in more than 400%. The company was very happy. Some people that lost money, no. But this really can be really stupid. Let me talk about the right-hand side first. So this is an example of the adversarial AI. So basically, you do a small change in the input, and you get teletransportation in the output. For example, you change a pixel that is in white here, and the horse becomes a dog. So what the system is learning if with 1 pixel you change to a completely different animal. So the question is, how sensible are the systems, and also what they are learning? There's a famous example that failed with Eskimo dogs, because basically to distinguish wolves and dogs, the system was used the snow behind. So it was not about the animal, it was about the context. And this example, the one in the left, it looks funny. So engineer in Facebook decided to use an English trained model in France and decided that the town of Bitche was very bad, and basically deleted the page of that town. That was a bad word. You can guess why. And they took 3 weeks to get the page back because there was no human in the loop looking at the complaints. This is funny? Not really. If the town is using this for COVID measures, this could be really dangerous. So what are the limitations? And we need to remember the limitations when we work with machine learning. First, it's very hard to forget filter data. We learn by filtering data. So we don't need to see a cat from 4 different angles to learn a cat. I don't know how we do it, but we do it. You see a cat when you are very young and say, okay, it doesn't matter from where you show it, to me the cat is a cat. And I like to remind here this famous short story from Jorge Luis Borges, Funus de Memorius. There was a person that couldn't forget anything. So if you said, how was your morning? You had to wait 3 hours for his account of his morning. Second, which should be obvious, you cannot learn what's not in the data. Autonomous driving. All the future, you cannot learn it because it's in the future. There always will be a situation in driving that is not in the data. Plus, what I already said for justice, data does not capture everything. And this is what happened when Uber killed a woman in 2018, because, of course, this was not in the data. At night, crossing in the wrong place, in a bicycle, the system didn't recognize that that was a person. This is also a very good example about accountability. Very fast, Uber settled with the family of the woman in a week. Okay, we'll pay this amount of money so you don't sue me. And then Uber decided to sell his autonomous vehicles unit. So they're not doing this any longer. I guess they decided it was too hard. But then the state had to do something, the state of Arizona, because the person was dead. And then when Uber said that the driver that was in the car was watching a video, she was accused of the accident. And of course, she was a poor Hispanic woman earning minimal wage. And the car was working almost all the time. And at night, she was watching a video. And when that happened, she couldn't react. Result, she was a guilty person, 1 year at home with these rings that you get into your legs so you cannot get out of your home. So at the end, was a poor woman that was responsible for this. So as I said before, accuracy is not the key, it's the impact of errors. I don't care if you work 99% of the time. I prefer to use a bad system that doesn't kill people than a very good system that sometimes kills people. This is an ethical decision that is hard, but we should take it. And also for the computer scientists in the room, learn to say, I don't know. Smart people say, I don't know when they don't know. Systems should do the same, right? Some people is basically outputting the result, even if the confidence is less than 80%. Say. And the final case examples are basically related to sustainability and climate change. Are we wasting resources by training these very, very large models that have bias and have other problems like even semantic errors? Well, this paper show that the carbon footprint of, for example, training small transformers, only 200 million parameters, is 57 years of the footprint of a normal person. And how much money? About $3 million, between $1 and $3 million in resources, basically electricity and other things, to train these models. So, but they are not so good. Last year, Stanford called these models now foundation models. It's a bit better than foundational, but still, you will have a foundation of a building that really has a lot of problems. I would not. And this is the paper that I was talking about. It's a famous paper now, the stochastic parrots, because this was the paper that triggered that Timmy Gebru was fired from Google, and that Margaret Mitchell couldn't put her name in the paper, but she put it anyway. And then for a different reason that was claimed that was due to her ethics, also Margaret Mitchell was fired in February 20, so a bit more than a year ago. And they were the colleagues of the ethical AI team in Google. Well, if you remember, before, Google tried to do an ethics board, and they had to basically dissolve it in 1 week because they chose the wrong people. I will get back to that at the end. And because of this case, we wrote a paper that appeared 1 year ago about the intellectual freedom on these kind of problems, even in companies. And I don't want to pick in Google. This happens in many big companies. So, for example, Amazon, Facebook. The last one you have heard in the news maybe is Spotify, and the case of people basically talking false news about COVID. And there are very few people that basically leave these companies because of ethical reasons, but I want to mention one of them that I know because he was in Waterloo when I did my PhD, Tim Bray, one of the inventors of XML. And he left Amazon in 2020 because of ethics concerns. And I think a lot of people is leaving companies because of ethics concerns lately. Okay, this is the end of the first part. Let's go to the second part. 5 years ago, and this was very early, this committee I belong now did a statement on the 7 properties algorithms should fulfill to basically have transparency and accountability. I will not read the properties, but basically no algorithm today has these properties. Maybe one, I don't know. So the first thing we need to remember that systems do not need to be perfect. They are learning from us, how they can be perfect. So I don't know why people want to believe that we are playing God and we can do something better than us. If we do that, we are still kind of stupid, really, not kind of intelligent. So one of my, another Chilean, Cesar Hidalgo, published last year this book, How Humans Judge Machines, where he shows that with crowdsourcing that humans judge machines harder than judging humans. So for some reason, we really believe that the machines should be better than us. So we should be careful about that. And there are pragmatical questions on the principles side. For example, to which part of the system applies? This is based on a published paper I'm finishing. Are all equally important? To whom is important? Can they be fulfilled at the same time? For example, transparency and accountability. Accountability is something that you ask in Anglo-Saxon culture because you trust the system. So you trust the system and say, okay, just be accountable at the end. I'm done. In more the south of Europe, we don't trust the system and we want transparency. We want to see what you're doing because I don't believe in what you're doing. So why we want both things? Is that fair into the system? But also too much transparency can be bad. And then the question is a principle or a tool requirement to achieve the principle? This is like human rights. What should be the right human rights? We have a consensus on that. Some people want to do neuro rights, so to split the brain with the body. By the way, if you have studied neuroscience, the brain was designed to manage our body. Thinking is a side effect of efficiency. The brain was not done for thinking, at least thinking the way we think. Because there are animals that are much more smarter than us for many other things, and you have seen examples of that. So you can classify some of these questions, for example, to whom applies, like data, algorithm, system, governance, or to whom is important, justice, government, users, and society. And here they have 30 properties of software. And with this, I propose this taxonomy that has 3 groups: awareness, data provenance, completeness, usability, transparency, and responsibility. The ones underlined are the ones that the ACM proposed, and if you see, this is kind of different. So maybe we need to work more on principles. This is just a proposal. There are more things to do. There are some people working on how to do responsible AI software, and the first book, I guess, is by Ben Schneiderman, just appeared, Human-Centered AI. Where you need to worry about different things, at team level, organization level, industry level. Here is a word that I don't like, trustworthy. I believe you shouldn't trust something that doesn't work. Asking to trust something that doesn't work is already an unethical issue. And I guess the next problem is how to use AI to develop responsible AI. There are legal and ethical colonialism. So this is a very interesting map from a project in the University of Ottawa that shows that basically we're down to Roman law, to common law, and to Muslim law. So these are the dominant laws in the world. And they look at ethics differently. For example, and this is more like, it's called technological humanism. It's more humanism, and if you have read, humanism is not so human. But this will be another talk, and I'm not the one that knows too much about that. But for example, I think because of a paper by lawyers at the end of the 19th century in the US, we have a difference between ethics all around the world, and you have legality in one side and morality in the other side. And there's a part where they intersect. But for example, if something was an ethical concern that becomes a law, then you should forget about ethics, because now it's a law. And we know that there are some laws that are non-ethical. So it's hard to say you lost the property because now it's part of the law. So this is another way to put it, you have morals, ethics, and law. And of course, it's something that basically moves to the law side. I think or if law grows, then ethics loses part of it. In the Muslim world, this is much more, I think, reasonable. Law is a subset of moral, and it's a set of individual conscience will be more related to ethics. I prefer this view of ethics and law. But, well, you have this cultural difference. So we have different also philosophies. I like Ubuntu, where it says that you are a person because we are together. And it's a very interesting essay by Aviva Berhane that says that Descartes was wrong. A person is a person through other persons. So it's not about the person, it's about the tribe. And remember, if you have read about Dunbar's number, maybe 10,000 years ago, we were in a tribe of 150 people. And the most important thing was to keep the tribe alive, not the person alive. And animals do that. And remember, we're animals too, although we talk about animals like being something else. For example, in many cases, one animal will sacrifice for the tribe, so to save all the other animals. For example, if you have a herd animal, the herd animal will sacrifice for the rest of the pack, for example. Then we have legal issues. We're entering the third part of the second part of this regulation, things about identity, data protection, and privacy. Here, I would like to stress minimal data collection. So take the data that you really need anonymously, and also the minimal time stored. Keep it as long as you need it, not more. Maybe you don't know, but for example, in the EU, there's a law that search engines cannot keep data more than 18 months. But they can keep all the data they gather. And if you want to read about that, I recommend this book, Privacy is Power. I don't agree 100% with everything, but I think it's a good book by Carissa Bellis. GDPR. There's a very important article related to AI in GDPR, Article 22. I don't want you to read the article. I will rewrite this article, but says at the end that you have the right to contest the decision if you don't agree with the decision, especially if you have automated individual decision making. One problem with automated individual decision making by machine learning is that not too individual, because machine learning is taking the average of everybody. So you are normalizing the decision. And for example, justice is not about average. Justice is about that particular case and that particular person. That's why there are ethical concerns of using these systems in justice. So let's rewrite this in a way that for computer scientists will be more practical, is that if you want to give information about the processing for transparency, you need interpretability. Interpretability means understanding how the system reaches a decision. But if you want people to contest your decision, you need to have explainability. That means explain why you took this particular decision and give me some insights on it. And if you want to make sure that the systems work as intended, so this is also basically in the future too, and models change, you need to do continuous validation, testing, and maintenance. So this is something that you need to ensure that they are working. However, there are issues even here because, for example, sometimes an explanation is worse than no explanation. If you have seen the series House, famous doctor that has a lot of symptoms, but that could be different illnesses. Well, the same can happen with an explanation from a machine learning model, because the symptoms may trigger different explanations, and in medicine, the wrong explanation could be really, really bad. GDPR already has been used in court, and this is an interesting case in 2020 in France. There were 3 high schools in the south of France that they started to use cameras for security outside, basically, the entrance of the school. And then some parents went to court saying that that was not legal, and the court agreed with them for 3 reasons that I think are very important. The first was competence. This is related to something I said before. The schools couldn't decide using cameras. The city could decide, but not the school, because the school was part of the public schools. So this is, again, something. Do you have the competence to take the decision you're taking? Sometimes we don't even ask this question. We just do it. Or let's use this data, the data you have, to do this problem. The data was not good, and the problem was not ethical. The second was consent. In Article 22 says that you can use, for example, video if you have either consent or legal basis. And legal basis usually only has to do with national emergencies, police, and so on. So, of course, no consent, you cannot use it. And the last one was proportionality. If you want to have security in a school, you don't need to basically record everything. You just need maybe a person in the door. So one problem of GDPR is that it's one size fits all, and that's one problem. And this problem may be a problem also in the EU AI Act of the EU. And this is what Lorena Jaume Palazzi will say is technological solutionism, which is more basically techno-solutionism. So technology will not solve our social problems. Technology will only replicate and maybe even worse, amplify our social problems. So accountability. Who is responsible? Like the Uber case I mentioned. So I think already mentioned this. I forgot that in the long version I had this story. So basically, how Uber settled very fast with the family, and then the woman that was inside the car was the guilty person. Regulation. I believe regulating technology is a mistake. We should regulate the problem, like we do with drugs, we do with food, we do with aviation, and so on. For example, we never regulated if we had to use what kind of motor a plane should use, right? No, we want a plane. Doesn't matter how the plane is. I don't know why people want to regulate AI, the use of AI, not AI, the use of AI. It's still the same problem. In the future, maybe do we need to regulate the use of quantum computing? I hope they don't do the use of blockchain, although it should be regulated because they use it for silly things. So we have many cases going on today in the US antitrust. For example, Lina Khan already published something about Amazon antitrust paradox in 2017, and she's now in charge of antitrust in the US. So 6 years later, 5 years later, Amazon is worried because Biden named her for the antitrust position. And this, you see here examples of Facebook, Amazon, and Google. Future regulation, well, during Trump, 4 proposals were rejected. One was done by Kamala Harris and other people in the Democratic Party. I hope this will happen during the Biden government, that you will see more regulation of this kind of technology. But Trump had 2 years to do the Artificial Intelligence Office. So this was, I think, was in 2019, where the Congress said, you need to create this. He didn't create it just before until he left. I guess not to leave it to Biden to create it, but he didn't want to create it for 2 years. Let's go to the EU proposal. This is almost a year now. Has some forbidden uses, has high and low risk systems. So by default, you have no risk. So basically you have 4 categories of risk: forbidden, high, low, and no. Has a lot of self-evaluation, has transparency obligations, a lot of very good things, but there's a few problems. For example, if you go to Article 5, Title 2, it says that it's forbidden to use subliminal techniques beyond a person's consciousness. Already, how define subliminal and being the person's consciousness? Sometimes even I feel people is not conscious. Materially distort the person's behavior in a manner that causes or likely to cause the person or another person physical or psychological harm. This is like the right to be forgotten. How we will enforce this? Imagine you show an ad of fast food to people that have morbid obesity, or you offer some very nice pastries to a person that is diabetic. No. We will start predicting these things. It's impossible. So this is nice, but it's technically very hard. So that will be one problem. The second problem is that we have this cognitive bias to categorize things as humans. Race is one example. So skin color is a continuous, almost continuous. The gene is very large, so it's almost a continuous variable. And we decided to put categories there. There's a very interesting article about this. And what is the problem here? Well, risk is a continuous variable. How we know where the boundaries? I know the game that the companies will play. They will cognitively bias their self-evaluation to be one level below the right level. And this game will be very hard to enforce what is the right bias. Another problem is that the act is based on examples, use cases. There's nothing about all the future use cases. And who will say where those will fit? They will publish one version every year? I don't know. There are things we can do, like we can do more transparency. Amsterdam and Helsinki are already registering algorithms, and surely this is happening in more places now. This is from 2020. We can audit algorithms, very important, but remember, if you audit an algorithm, you are legitimizing the use of the algorithm. So be sure that you want to audit. Maybe you want to ethical assessment, and that's it. So we're working in a very broad kind of audit that starts with an ethical assessment and not a technical assessment. So there was a very interesting paper that was published in last year, in fact. It's about the audit of a candidate screening tool, so basically to hire people. And this audit was done, requested by the company, but the company agreed to publish the results before doing the audit. So luckily, they passed the audit. The audit was about gender parity. But then there was criticism because by doing these audits, they were legitimizing the methodology. For example, they were using games to evaluate people. Is ethical to use games to evaluate how good is a person for a given position? Probably not. So there's you can find that in the web. So we have a lot of, and the last one is cognitive biases. We have a lot of bad human practices. I will not read this. So we have some time for questions. So these are things we do. The last one is one of the worst. We use bad quality data or just the data that you have. Murphy's law for data. The data you need is not the one that you have. So be careful. Many people don't look at data. You have to look at data to understand it. So some professional biases we have. We are focusing on big data, while small data is more common. I wrote an essay in KD Nuggets in 2018 And finally, something really famous like Andrew Ng said the same. I'm big in AI, in Spectrum this year. So we need to really do that. We should look at small data. Health is small data. Your devices are small data, and so on. The second is a question that is important. Your design and your coding has bias that is basically transferred to the application. I was using in my talk about bias on the web this example I mentioned about the 29 groups that did different things. So if you have a system done by men, I'm sure it will be different by a system done by women. I hope the women's system will be more empathic with the user, much better user experience and so on. Well, in 2020, a group in Norway showed that that happens. So basically, your biases get encoded in the code. So that's even worse. We need to have diversity in coding teams. We need to have culture, gender, and so on there. Evaluation, well, how many papers have been rejected because of choosing wrongly one of these things? Wrong experiment, wrong test data, wrong metric, wrong baseline, the worst one. You don't compare with the state of the art because then you lose, you compare with the previous one. Right? And there's a very good talk about this from Julio Gonzalo. Okay, so let me give you an example that is one from my former PhD students and also from another PhD student that was working on predicting dyslexia on people that didn't read and write. And here you have the number of data we were able to collect. 44,000 children, 50,000 children for Spanish English. And for example, here you see something very interesting, that even that you have more data in Spanish, you get worse accuracy. Anyone can guess why? Any linguists in the room? No, this is just, this was, no. The reason is because Spanish is phonetic language. So it's easier to make a mistake in English because it's not phonetic, and even more for people with dyslexia. But that's the reason. And I believe, although not all people will agree, that the sound helps the people with dyslexia to know what is the right spelling. But because I have studies about that, so here we have a person that disagrees. But because it's the same sound, then all the mistakes are there. So it's a symptom, but it's not the cause. So what we can do, the last part of the, and then we have some time for questions. So what we can do, learn about bias in your data. Try to make the system aware of the bias. You remember the first class, awareness. So of course, the system will not have agency, but have kind of pseudo-aware of what it's doing. The third, make the user aware of the bias of the system. That's another way that the system can improve awareness of this. And finally, well, evaluation, do not fool yourself, that's easy. And then you need to register algorithms, you need to do external audits, you need to document everything well. Some recommendations for us. Design for people. Remember all these limitations I mentioned. Don't reproduce the past. To change the future, we need to not use the past. Have an ethics board. I will talk a little bit about this. You already have it, good. Improve explainability. Design thinking with humans in control, not with humans in the loop. We are playing God, we are in control, come on. Don't fool yourself. Don't put humans in the loop just to make someone accountable. And finally, remember the ethics is like privacy. It's not only about you. The ethics, your ethics depends on all the ethics of the people that are surrounding you. So it's like Ubuntu. It's not independent, it's a group. So I have a presentation that you can search in the web on the 10 key questions that the company should do before and during using AI. And basically, they are about competence, proportionality, and responsibility awareness. So these are the 10 or 11 things that you should ask. The first one, of course, is the application ethical, right? This is the question number 0 that you should ask. Now, we have a model for responsible AI at the Institute. The model, of course, is based on ethics, has 3 branches. One is about the strategy, one is about the technical analysis and also the ethical risks, and the other one is about the training of the people that is developing these things. Here we have audits and registry of systems, but we are launching, maybe in less than 2 weeks, we're launching an independent high-level ethics advisory board that can be used on demand. This is for all the institutions that don't have an ethics board. Because many institutions shouldn't have an ethics board. They don't have ethical questions every day. The university has. But for example, most institutions will have an ethical question every year. But if they want to solve it well, they need to have like a very high level. And we assemble very famous people, 40 people from all over the world to have different views, different sectors, and so on. So this is completely new and I think it's important. And here, sadly, that the EU has this trustworthy AI because AI is not trustworthy. I hope after this talk you realize that. And trustworthy will be to reach the same level of building buildings, building cars, or building bridges, or elevators. So one thing missing, and this is one of my last slide, is ethical risk assessments. I mentioned this several times. So let me put you an ethical dilemma. I'm not an ethicist, but I can put you an ethical dilemma. I don't like the trolley dilemma. It's really like, yes, but it never happened, right? Or if it happened, will be not practical. But this is a real dilemma that we have. So this is people killed by cars, right? A lot of people. I'm sure that self-driving cars will kill much, much less people. What is the problem? The problem is that it's not a subset of these people. It's this. So much smaller, but there will be people there that have never died because of a car accident that now will die. Like the woman in Arizona. Maybe like a kid that was a plane and the car didn't realize that was a person. So this is the question. It's okay to reduce by 10% the people dying in accidents, mainly men, and then killing more children and women. It's an ethical issue that the society needs to solve. I don't have the answer, so it's not my field, but it's a real dilemma. So to end, remember, there is no virtual reality. There are no virtual worlds, really. The metaverse is just the beginning of Matrix, could be. If you have people playing video 8 hours, now they will be in the metaverse 12 hours. And they will have anorexia and other problems. So we are creating mirrors of us that amplify us, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the problems start the solution starts by being aware of our biases and our ethics. So, for example, Hazel Henderson says, can algorithms ever be ethical? It's much more than that, but the simple answer is no, because ethical is a human thing, like justice, or like trust. And then David Lauer says something obvious, but someone has to say it. We cannot have AI ethics without ethics. So if you don't have ethics in your company, don't lose your time trying to have ethics of AI. So to finish, my 3 favorite quotes. One from Mark Twain. There are 3 kinds of lies: timelines, and statistics. And it was not true, so it's already a lie. Second was not true, the attribution. Of course, this is an interesting sentence. The second is the one way to say the same more seriously, and this was a novel in economics, but he did before the novel. Torture the data enough and it will confess to anything. like the example of the 29 analyses that were different and they didn't agree on the result. So you can see numbers the way you want. And finally, the most interesting, I have seen it twice in different ways, one in person when he was at Stanford, and I had the luck to be with him in a trip to Antarctica. That was a whole story. Be invited by the government of Chile. So the easiest people to manipulate are the ones that believe that cannot be manipulated. Think about this. So current affairs, I'm not afraid of artificial intelligence, I'm afraid of real intelligence. I see it in so many elections these days. Because this may happen. Prove you're not a human. The robot says there are no more humans. The machine says correct, and they both laugh. But they don't laugh because they kill people. They laugh because we killed ourselves, right? And we have a word now. Even, well, how many words are active in the world? Talking about bias. How many words are active in the world? I want an answer. How many? How many can you name? Well, there are more than 20 words active right now in the world. We're talking only about one, and we forgot a few that were more closer to Europe. So there's a lot of bias there. I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything, but I say we will be much nicer, that we should be more fair with all the people in the world that is in trouble. So, yeah, there are two conferences that really touch in this topic, FACT and AIES. Interesting, for example, FACT, because of ethical concerns, doesn't accept sponsorships from companies that don't have the right ethics. So this is a big improvement, but it's also difficult to organize a conference without those sponsors. This was in Barcelona last year. So questions? So we have 15 minutes for questions. Ulises, of course.
Thank you. Sí, em passarà la paraula.
Et dono això i ja està, no?
Vale, sí.
There is a bias of the person in charge.
Penso que era la primera paraula. Qui havia demanat la paraula? Who was the first?
And then we apply gender parity. So,
well, nice talk, very enlightening. So I have only one, more than a question, remark. So most of the time you are always talking about machine learning, but in fact you are talking only about deep learning, because most of the other non-deep learning, or let's say non-symbolical methods for machine learning may not share most of the problems that you are exposing, because the kind of data is different. We don't need so much data. Experiential data is included. Contextual data is included. Semantics is included. And one of the things that when people start confusing machine learning with deep learning, I know that it's a big leap and there is a lot of non-ethical companies trying to do that. I believe that there is the wrong mistake, because there is plenty of good researchers doing the other kind of AI that's still and has been always the case. And yeah, I don't believe that it's fair for AI researchers to be always confused with deep learning research.
Yeah.
And there is other one thing that's just, you said that it's important that decision-making made that machines do not harm humans, but if it should be really what we call we will be calling in the future trustworthy AI, it should be also careful with the environment. So this does not harm not only humans, but also the environment, because, well, it's an anthropocentric, let's say, proposition.
No, I agree with the second, and that's why I have the sustainability example. So one thing is what the EU says, another thing is what I say. So of course, not only environment, animals and other things. Now, I disagree with, I'm not only talking about deep learning, because almost all the time I'm using machine learning, because many examples I show are machine learning. For example, the main example I gave of amplifying bias is a decision tree. It's not deep learning. And many examples I show about justice, and for example, the case of Netherlands, all that is it's not even machine learning, it's an algorithm. So really, there's like half are deep learning and half are not deep learning here. Of course, deep learning is the one that gets more press, but if you go to the incident database AI that I showed, most examples are also in the medical field are not with deep learning. So these are also not deep learning. So I don't think the problem is only deep learning. I guess the deep learning, the main problem is that more hard and more obscure because it's a black box. But really, this doesn't matter. This happens in medicine, for example. Only 2 days ago, I saw a very interesting talk where if you take medical data and you take out one demographic variable, let's say gender, and now you predict that with 100%, and that shows that there is a bias. And if you can predict, for example, age very well, that shows also there's a bias. Because if you can predict something that you know very well with the data, that means that the data is not, say, well distributed in the problem space. So yeah, so this happens in very simple machine learning. I guess the difference is that in simple machine learning, it's easier to spot the problem, but in very large systems, it's much harder. A question from a woman? No? No?
Thank you very much for this extensive lecture or conference. I would like to ask you about, there are several polarities going on because of the development of artificial intelligence. And one of them is the one I would like to ask you, is the polarity between companies, industries, developing big systems of artificial intelligence. This, on one side, they are very powerful. They have lots of resources, human resources, talent, money, and so on. And the other side of the polarity is academy, the university, for example. We are slower, much more slow, much slower than the companies in developing things, or even in thinking things. And we have not very many resources. And so the question is, if you have any advice to give to the academic world about how to deal, how to position, how to take part in these developments of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, good and hard question. I don't have a full solution, but I would say try to apply to the collaboration programs of these companies. So at least you get their data and their money. So you get a little bit. Of course, you will never get to the same level of resources. The other thing we'll say collaboration. So do like very large academic consortia, and this is happening in Europe in many ways. This is the only way to have more resources and more people basically in one problem. I would say that something that's very common in the US, that maybe, I don't know if in Europe can be exploited, but in the US there are many family funds. And for example, they are giving a lot of money to research. For example, I don't know how you read, but for example, the former wife of Jeff Bezos, Melissa, she already gave away $3.5 billion to research, to hundreds of institutions. That's a lot of money for those institutions. So I hope this is a trend. I hope it's a trend where the people that have more money that can ever spend will start giving away more money. But I don't have a solution for that. However, I would like to add another polarity, which is also, I'm also worried, I understand why you worry about academia, but the other actor in that polarity is the governments. And most of these companies are even more powerful than governments. And have more people than governments, than any country. So more users than any country. So this is another, for me, this is more worrisome. Like we have de facto regulation that is imposed by companies. And this is more important for me, like privacy, data protection, subliminal manipulation in the interaction, like what I did with you. You read these lines in the order I wanted. You can do much better than that with colors, with images. You can basically decide what you want to see or not. Now we have to say row parity. In the first row.
This is a bias, yeah. Yeah, I guess that since we are in a ethics committee and sometimes we evaluate research and projects, and probably many ethic boards have the dilemma of judging some research that on average has a collective benefit, as you mentioned. I mean, machine learning is trying to minimize the average error or whatever, right? But of course, at the expense of maybe some individual impact. And then when people go to court, typically it's because some individual right has been violated. And then judges typically, or laws, are mostly focused on individual rights, right? So what to do in front of this dilemma?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So the trade-off between the society and the individual. This is something, like I said, it should be societal decision, so it should be regulated. For example, I have an example that I wrote once an essay about this. It's one that is not about if you cause harm or not, but it's about what rights you have. Let's say you have a robot that is a surgeon, and they're already surgeons are robotic. Imagine that you have really very good robots that for most types of operations, most of the surgeries, the robot will do fine. But for the difficult ones, maybe you want a human because there will be something unexpected, like in driving, and then the human can take a better decision. So the first thing will be who does the surgery. But then, the only way to make these robots better is to have, I call it Jedis of surgery. We don't need so many surgeons anymore, but we need the masters of surgery that can teach new things to the robots, right? And here comes the dilemma. The only way to be a Jedi is that you need to be an apprentice at some point. And to be an apprentice, you need to practice. And that means that you need to also do other surgeries to people. So what do? Randomly, we choose a person to do this or not. So this is something hard to decide. It's similar to what you're saying. I think we cannot look at the individual. We have to look at the group. But we need to change for that. We need to do Ubuntu, not capitalism. And you can find that in Medium if you want to read this dilemma that has it's about errors from machines, errors from humans, and also about how much you can extrapolate.
There is a very special case on chirurgy that is transplants, organ transplants. And the problem there is that, of course, to be a good transplanter, first you need to be a good surgeon, but then only those that perform the transplants get more experience. The most you perform, the better you are. But then those that are transplanting never want to, they don't allow new ones to come. So then the only way is that someone that's the second in some place goes to a new transplantation team in another hospital. And it's very weird because it's a very small team. And if you transplant lung, you don't transplant brain.
This is the second order bias of competition between people. Question there from good woman. And
It's more a comment. Thank you for the presentation, Ricardo. Now, regarding the comment, the distinguished that he mentioned regarding the universities and and companies, I think maybe it's very difficult to compete, no, the university, the academia with the resources and the power of the companies. But if we think about where all the student and all the person have the education is in the university. Yes. So I think this type of courses and the workshop and all the training that they have in the university. For example, I know that the Stanford have a specific course regarding the bias and the sex and gender bias in during the design of the new technologies. So I think if all the students and the people that are designing and develop the AI in the future have this awareness about the difficulties and the problem that could affect the society, then in the future when get involved in the companies could give their point of view. Of course, it's a different dynamics, but the academia could do that include as mandatory discourses and this type of conference that you did. So thank you so much.
I agree. That's why we need to change the system, the solution. But also regarding your question, Jordi, I think something very important that sometimes we don't do is talk to the people that is affected by the system. Talk to them. So not think about what they think, is go and do the field study. Saying, okay, both people that is affected and people that is basically people where you contribute and people where you affect. I think yes. So these are another part of the audit, the social part.
Thanks for the wonderful presentation. This is really essential matter when we consider to serve the society, and these things should be considered for further developments. I have a question related to the deep learning. That there was a time when researchers thought that the only big data can serve better. But now there is a trend that about the data-centric learning, means to make the algorithms learn from good data rather than big data. Yeah. So what do you think this can contribute towards the ethical AI?
Yes, because one of the first things you should do is to have good data, right? This is part of the problem. So you should use, and I have a talk, it's called Big Data, Small Data, or Right Data. So you can find it, to have a talk only on that problem. And this, I think, it helps because at least you start with quality data. For example, that will imply that you have to take care of bias in the data. Or if you cannot take care of that, you are aware of it, and so on. So I think also that goes in the line of small data, because basically you will learn that most problems don't have enough data. For example, most problems in health is small data. Even in some illnesses, it's really, you cannot even use machine learning. You can find 20 people with the problem. And that's why you don't have drugs for that illness either, because it's not a business, right? So we have many wrong incentives to solve this problem, but we should go that way. So I love that. I didn't know they were calling data-centric. I thought that was always data-centric, but I guess quality-centric, I would put it. So that's for sure. That's a good way to go.
Thank you for the answer.
It's not, what's the question?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, there is a question here in the chat. I'm reading the question. Some explainability methods for complex AI models, that for instance, deep learning, may be able to explain the model's reasoning to other AI experts, but the explanation may not be understandable for the average user affected by the AI decision. Do you think that this is enough, or should we strive to give explanations that do not rely on expert knowledge of the model itself?
Yeah, so this is not enough. For example, if you want to comply with Article 22, you need to explain this to the person. But for example, you can always have a person that interprets this thing and basically, technically, to contest the decision means not only explainability, means to be able to talk to a person. So that person should translate the more complicated answer to that people. Maybe in the future, a new job will be translating a very complex explanation to any people so they can understand them. With the problem that sometimes the explanation may be just story. George Hinton said that once, that for him explanations are just stories. Like people make stories when they are asked about something. So sometimes we explain things with a story that is our explanation, but it's not the real explanation. And then we have these biases too, so it's not easy. Yeah, but this is important, yes.
Hi, this was a wonderful presentation. Well, my background is not related to the AI, but the presentation is well defined, and I can understand what is the role of ethics in AI. So my question is quite related to the same question that this guy has, my friend has arrived. The question is that when we talk about the ethics in AI, so how do you enlighten a problem that I am looking at? I'm just observing that, for example, AI needs a data. AI model needs a data. And when we talk about a good data rather than a big data, so it means good data is already filtered out from a big data. So it means we are looking a very good data. And in that good data, we need both, for example, let's say there could be the errors in the systems. I mean, for example, if a person is committing some criminal acts, so the AI needs a very good data for that criminals. So what do you think that how the ethics can be involved in these things, that AI needs a very good data, that criminal must do these things or not? For the AI model, I mean, for a good prediction, the data must have these kinds of, the records also, the bad records, we can say. So what do you think the AI, in the ethics, it is really a concern or no?
So having good data is not enough.
Yes.
So as I said, the first question is not about the data. The first question is, should we use AI to solve this problem? This is the first question. And that's an ethical question. And this is the question that most of the time is never asked. So they ask it when something wrong happens, not before. So, and that's why what I was saying to Jordi, that we should involve all the actors, all the stakeholders of the application. This should be from the beginning. Like the first focus group is, should we do this or not? And include civil society, potential users, potential people that will earn money from the usage of that, and then take a decision. Okay, the problem, we are in a gray area right now, because almost anything we can do. But we should auto-regulate there. Let's say, okay, yeah, we can earn a lot of money of this, but it's not ethical. This question should be more time should be asked, and also the answer, we should give the right answer. We should say no, even if it really hurts our pockets. So this is the first question. The second question, of course, for me is like, okay, we have the right data to solve this problem well. Of course, there's another question before, and this is with my phrenology example, that is based on a scientific fact or not. So what I'm doing really is scientifically correct. This is the second question. So it's ethical, but then can't really guess if you will be a criminal from your face. Of course not. I mean, there's no scientific reason that you can use for that. So this is the second question, ethical question, that is, I am doing pseudoscience or I'm doing science? And the third one will be, okay, I'm doing science and it's ethically correct. Okay, let's worry about the data. That would be my third question. And in all the design process, you need to be sure that your hypotheses are true. And this is something that we really don't check. For example, user experience. It's not what you think, it's what the user thinks. And of course, there's always be different. The Murphy law of user experience is what you assume is wrong. So these are the things that you need to do. And this is what Ben Schneiderman tries to do in his book. He's a HCI person, so he's worried about these things. But still, we need to do more work, because I would say that if you really want to worry, everything is more complicated. You will need more time. And companies don't want to spend more time. They don't want to spend more money on doing these things. They want to go fast. The first ethical issue, I think, is this rule that do it fast until it breaks, because sometimes breaks with people being harmed and the environment, like what Ulysses said, and other things. But the first thing is humans. So this is something that we need to be aware all the time. If you're aware, I think awareness is the first thing. If you're aware, that solves 90% of the problem. If you know the problems, that solves 90% of the problems. But many people don't ever think about this. I don't know why. Well, one thing is important to have an ethics course in university. All people have especially ethics and technology course. Should be compulsory, not optional.
Hello.
Yes.
First of all, thank you.
So we went from the first row to the last row. Okay.
Now the prediction is opposite.
There's a parity here.
Okay. Thank you. It was a nice presentation. So my question is that as we see the technology is increasing or growing day by day, and the future models are related to the AI and the machine learning. So if the technology is increasing, so what could be the impact in the future on the ethical point of view?
Can you repeat the question, sorry? The last part.
Okay. Hello. I said, as the technology is increasing, okay.
Yeah, the last part of the question.
What could be the impact of these technologies on the society or on the ethical point of view, sir?
So you're saying how the technology will change our ethics?
Yeah.
Interesting question. I hope it doesn't go that way, because technology shouldn't change the way we do things. It's the other way around. Technology should be a tool to have a better well-being. And one problem today that is a tool to earn more money. And these things are not aligned well. So the correlation is low. And this is the part of the problem. So, for example, these things are changing the way we live. So some people prefer to look at this rather than to talk to people. So I think that's the wrong way to go. When technology changes human things. But this is my personal opinion. Other people might disagree. So I would say the other way around, how we can change technology so it's more aligned with humanity. Humanity in the sense not of humanism, of humankind.
Well, I think it's time. Let's go to the last question. In fact, it's more a comment than a question. It's quite long, so I will read it. I have enjoyed the dissertation. Thank you. Here are my objections, though. Critical theory applies to all aspects of culture, but never has been applied to digital technology, and surely not to AI, which is sad. Since all AI is based on a fundamental lie, the Turing test is a celebration of a basic lie, how to mislead a human successfully, and Minsky insisted in this look. The main question is defending ethics, which is not the same as moral, and it's shown in some images displayed. I was talking about Kant. I think that the speaker has shot in a lot of directions without a critical or epistemic model in mind, by juxtaposing many aspects of the subject of AI, which makes this conference, of course, a good exercise of brainstorming in the sense of an overwhelming quantity of issues cast in the session. Nonetheless, a lot of structure is missing, and I missed a minimum of synthesis, especially in the analysis of intersections of law, politics, ethics. In my opinion, it lacks a solid cultural understanding of things. Well, that's all. It's more a comment than a question itself.
Can you capture it? Because I would like to read it carefully later.
Yeah,
I'm not a philosopher, so I'm sure I have weaknesses on the ethics side, and as I said at the beginning, I'm just learning. Yes, and part of the problem that not being be able to have more structure and summary is that this is being developed right now. So there is no real book on AI ethics, for example, yet. So this is part of the problem. We are working on something that's still being developed, and I hope there is more work on the philosophy side too, and even people that is working on this, there are disagreements between the ethicists. So I have talked to many, and they don't even agree on how to look at this problem. So it's not easy. Yeah, so I agree almost 100% with that.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think it's time. Ricardo, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us and introducing us in responsible AI and many different aspects. I think that you provided us a lot of food for thought and also food for research, as there are researchers here, because there are many interesting issues that must be tackled right now and in the near future. So thank you very much. And please accept this small present as a recognition for coming here and sharing with us your time. Thank you very much.